All right, guys, we're gonna get started. It's 12:30. So this session is all about protecting state data, and we have Martha Wewer, who is our Chief Data Privacy Officer. We have been working with Martha to implement data loss prevention and sensitive labels. So we are going to kind of take you from the why and also show you the how. So I have Michelle Chichi here from Microsoft, and I probably pronounced her name incorrectly, but she's here to show you the how we are going to do it. And we also have AvePoint here. And the goal from an AvePoint perspective is how would you get visibility from a user perspective and also from an admin perspective. So we're going to take you the journey. So this is definitely a journey. We are just piloting some of this information. So your agency, this is going to be eventually hitting your agency if you work for a different agency like DHHS, DOT, but currently we are starting this with the DIT. So please welcome Martha.
Okay, can you all hear me okay? Because I talk with my hands, so I can't have a microphone because then I'm just waving it all over the place. So hi, I'm Martha Wewer, and I am the state's Chief Privacy Officer. This is a little aggressive in my face. Hang on. Okay. When I started this job, I kind of had this joke that no one is as passionate about data classification as I am, except for maybe Ash. And why am I talking about data classification? Because data classification is the overarching umbrella for things like data loss prevention and sensitivity labels. It is how we protect state. It's one of the ways we protect state data, right? We do lots of things to protect state data, but one of the ways that we do it is by classifying data. So an important piece of a data classification program is understanding the types of data that you have. And one of the ways in which we can do that is by labeling our data with these sensitivity labels. So a couple of months into my role, we had an assessment where we looked at the data classification policy that we had, which had the 3 categories, low, medium, and high, I think. And industry best practice tells us that we want to kind of break it down a little bit more, help people understand exactly what the data is that they're working with and how you can look at that data, identify it, and then classify it and treat it properly, right? So we broke it down into 4 tiers, which is the public, internal, confidential, and restricted. So I'm a big fan of mnemonics, so I always remember PICR, P-I-C-R. And that is sort of the sensitivity of the data in order, right? So why do we care about labeling data? Because it helps ensure that we are providing the proper access to the data. We are sharing it properly and with whom we're supposed to be sharing it, right? And then, you know, the long pole in every conversation, right, is artificial intelligence. And so if we understand the data that we have, we can have safe and trustworthy artificial intelligence usage at the state because we aren't putting our most sensitive data into those models, right? So by labeling the data using Purview, which Michelle is going to walk you through, we create these sort of digital wrappers, right? The label follows the information, the document, the email throughout its life cycle, unless you change it, right? So what we've started doing at DIT is a pilot where we are applying these labels to email. The default label is going to be internal. So internal is something that is for pretty much everybody in the agency's eyes, but maybe not outside the agency. And it's not public data, maybe not something we want to share with the general public, but it is something that employees need to know or can access or view. Maybe we don't want folks outside of our agency to see this information, but it's not so sensitive that we need to call it confidential, right? So DIT is applying these labels in a pilot program, and we're hoping to roll it out to all of the other state agencies with lots of training, lots of guidance, lots of information about how to apply them and what it means. But we look forward to being able to have this tool in our toolbox so that we can have good data classification at the state, right? We're continuing to protect state data. So it helps us enforce access controls to authorized users. It'll help us prevent forwarding to people we shouldn't forward to. I am not going to sing. Nobody wants to see that. I will dance a little dance. But I don't know if that was me supposed to be getting off the stage, maybe. Anyway, but it helps us prevent, unauthorized access. It helps us prevent sharing of data with people who shouldn't have that data. It'll keep us out of, regulatory jail. It'll help us comply with laws and regulations that we're supposed to comply with. I know there's some folks from DHHS here. We think about HIPAA, we think about FERPA, we think about all of these regulations that really tell us that we have to protect this information. And this is a tool that will help us do that. And so with that, I think you all might want to see the tool. So I'm going to introduce Michelle from Microsoft. Please give her a warm welcome. And thank you so much for listening.
All right, folks. Good afternoon. Welcome back from lunch, everyone. I'm going to try to be as brief as I can because I know some of us might be suffering from food coma. So let me get my presentation up. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the data security pilot that Martha mentioned. DIT has been working hard on this project, folks. And, the big thing that I want to make sure that you all know is that these labels are here to help protect your data. State work has to move very quickly, as I'm sure you all know. But, the everyday tools you're using, whether it's email, you're working in a spreadsheet, you're sharing links, this can move sensitive citizen data really quickly. So we're not asking everyone to become a security architect. What we want is to give you a repeatable habit that you can use within your Outlook, within your Office files, and within SharePoint. The whole goal here is that transparency remains the default for state work. These labels help separate routine public information from legally sensitive or regulated data that needs extra protection and handling. So the big things that I want to make sure that you leave this session today with is that you're going to understand what a label is, how one gets applied, how that's going to help with sharing safely. So, big question you should ask yourself as we're going through this is think about the last spreadsheet or email that you sent. What would that person know about how to handle that data? Would they know that that data shouldn't be shared? Would you be able to stop them from sharing it? The labels are going to help address those different things. So Martha mentioned this, you put a sensitivity label on a file or an email and it's a wrapper around that file or email. It becomes part of the bits and bytes of that file or email, which means it's going to follow it wherever it goes. Doesn't matter if you attach it to an email or you download it from SharePoint and you create a copy. That label, that protection is still going to be there. In some instances with these labels, they might apply visual markings, headers or footers, maybe watermarks on the data. This is going to be a nice visual indicator, not only to you, but to anybody that you're sharing that data with, that it's sensitive in nature and that they need to be cautious about how they are handling it. So depending on how the label is configured, it can trigger things like email encryption, or it can limit access. So let's say you had a sensitive spreadsheet that got downloaded from SharePoint. Your permissions on that SharePoint site just went out the window. How do you make sure the right people have access to that file and block the wrong people from getting access to it? This is what your labels are going to be able to do for you. So You may be asking yourself, okay, it's in a pilot right now with DIT. When is it going to come to me? DIT is going to be working directly with each agency to coordinate the label timeline and rollout, and they're going to be communicating far and wide to your agency before this comes to you. So please don't be in a panic today. They're going to make sure that you've got all of the education and the tools available to you when the time comes for your agency. There are going to be 4 major categories that you're going to see with these labels. So your big question as you're working with data is, what is the content? What type of protection does it need? If it's public, this is content that's been approved already for everyone. This could be a newsletter. This could be press releases or public website materials, stuff that is safe to share with citizens, no regulatory impact at all. The internal labels, these are for your routine state business. This is data that's intended to stay inside of your state agency or to be shared with other agencies within the state. This could be interagency planning documents. It could be staff guidance, for example. Your third category, confidential information. And this is more serious. This is information that could cause harm if it's exposed or misused. So think about contracts or personal data or security details as some of the examples for confidential data. You want to make sure that you're putting that label on when you're dealing with that type of data, because there are going to be extra controls that come with that. And the last category, your restricted content. This is the most serious content. This could be data like CGIS or PHI or FTI. This stuff is subject to regulatory or legal requirements and really has a heightened sense of duty, of care for how that data is handled. So when these labels come to your agency, before you choose the label, you should really be asking yourself, what kind of information is in this file or email? What level of protection does it need? What do I want to communicate with other people who are going to access this data as far as how sensitive it is? And then choose the appropriate label. I want to kind of step back because we've been talking a lot about just conceptual, these labels are coming. I like to kind of compare sensitivity labels with old school file cabinets. I am probably dating myself right there when I say I used hanging folders for the longest time. I still use them today. And if you think about the concept of a file cabinet, that could be your folder out in SharePoint or your SharePoint site. And that hanging folder that you're putting your data in, whatever that tag is that you're putting on that folder, think of that as your sensitivity label. Anything that you're putting in there, you're going to get that label. So again, you need to take that data out. You're going to pull that folder. You're going to take it with you from the file cabinet. That label that was on your folders, coming with it. Same idea with the sensitivity labels when you are applying them to files or emails. So other thing I want to mention, these labels, they're going to be available to you across all of your Office apps. It doesn't matter if you're on Windows. It doesn't matter if you're on Mac. If you're somebody who likes to use the Office apps on the web, you're going to see those labels in all of those locations. Microsoft developed these so that you're going to be able to work on the device that you want to, in the location you want to, and still have access to these critical tools to keep your data appropriately classified. So you'll see it in Outlook. You'll see it in your Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. At some point in the future, you may even see auto labeling where, DIT will roll out the ability for the system to read the content of your files and label it accordingly to kind of give you a helping hand. So let's take a look at what these labels actually look like in action. So this is a great example of labels in Outlook. So you can see here, there's a shield icon. You're going to see the shield icon in your Outlook today. It's not going to do anything for you. When you get those labels, though, you're going to see what we see on the screen here, where you could click on that shield. You'll get the drop down with the pick list of all of the labels. If you're unsure which label to choose, you'll notice as you're hovering over there's a little description. You're going to get a helping hand right there within the Office app. So if you're like, gosh, should it be an internal? Should it be confidential? Hover your mouse over the label and then, read the guidelines that you're seeing there. In some cases, there are going to be additional controls, like we mentioned with the internal or the confidential labels. So here's a great example. We've labeled this data. We're going to go send it to somebody out at Yahoo. And as this is typing, you'll see you're going to get this policy tip that says, hey, you're sharing this sensitive data with external recipients, and this may be violating policy. That tip might not be enough. So you could see a block like this. If you go to send and you've put an inappropriate recipient on that email, we're going to have protections in place to make sure that you don't accidentally overshare that data with somebody outside of the organization that shouldn't have access to it. Your Office apps are also going to have the labels. So you will see the shield along the title bars you see in this screenshot. You're also going to have a sensitivity button on your ribbon. It's going to kind of look like a stamp. So if you click on that, you'll see the same exact labels that you would if you clicked on the shield. Same functionality over here in Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. So if you run into a situation where you aren't sure what label you want to use, hover over the labels, look at the description. That's going to give you your guiding hand there. Right. Now, we've talked a lot about the labels, how they become part of the files. They're going to follow your files and emails everywhere. They're going to make sure that protection is enforced. I do want to talk a little bit about which side of the wall that you're on, because, from a Microsoft perspective, we could say things like, oh, as long as they're in your tenant, this is going to happen. And if they're outside of your tenant, that's going to happen. You may not know who's part of your tenant. You might not even know what a tenant is. So, here's the big thing. Internal doesn't always mean your agency. There are a lot of agencies in the NCDIT tenant. So internal really means anybody who's working for the state that has an account that can access your SharePoint, they could be considered internal. So when you're thinking about this and as the labels are rolling out to your agency, you may also have agency-specific labels. So I do want to highlight this whole thing right here. If it's shared, DIT, DHHS, DOT, for example, some of the agencies that are within your tenant, they're all considered internal. But DHHS might have their own label that's going to lock that data down. So if you're not part of DHHS, you're not reading that data because you don't have a need to know what that data says. So there are other shared or, other agencies outside of your tenant, think county, towns, local governments. They're not going to be part of that internal label. Those are folks that you may need to use different labels for. So I would be remiss if I did not mention artificial intelligence in our conversation about data security, because AI is at the forefront of almost everybody's minds today. There are a lot of different AI tools out there, and good labels, good data classification is going to make AI safer, because AI is going to inherit the governance around the content. So if, let's say, you received data that had that DHHS label on it, and you're not part of DHHS, not only are you not going to be able to open that data, but any AI that is running in your user context, it can't open it either, because it's got the same permissions that you do. So it's going to keep that data protected if it's something that shouldn't be shared with artificial intelligence. And, Copilot as well, it will respect the permissions on those labels. Those of you who are fortunate enough to get the premium Microsoft 365 Copilot license, one of the things I run into internally at Microsoft is I'll be working with Copilot to create content for a customer, and it's pulling in data from all over SharePoint. I don't always know the sensitivity of that data, but Copilot does. Copilot's going to see the labels on the data that it's sourcing, and whatever label is the most restrictive, the content you're creating is going to inherit that label. So you don't have to worry about what was the sensitivity of the data that I used to create this file or this PowerPoint presentation. It's already going to know. It's going to put that label on it for you, and then you can decide whether or not that label is appropriate for your content you're creating and adjust it accordingly. The most important thing about AI readiness work is not just the rollout of the new tool, it's making sure you get your data estate labeled, get it permissioned, get it governed. All of this work that DIT is doing on the labeling pilot is going to help with that. Those labels and permissions, they're going to be foundational in your environment, as well as in any AI-enabled workflows in the future. All right, folks. So as I mentioned, I was going to keep this nice and brief, so I'm going to wrap it up here. 3 big takeaways for you. Even though you're going to have the labels, you are the protection. There's a concept of the human firewall. You're the first line of defense when it comes to data security. So always keep that in mind. The labels are there to help you make sure that when you're not there to be the first line of defense, the labels are going to pick up. Make sure too that when you are thinking about the labels, label the content. Take a look at that content and decide what is the classifications that is really correct for that content. It may not be simply, let's put our agency label on it. You may need to share that data outside of your agency. So really sit down and think about it. And, as long as you've got the right label, you're going to have the right permissions. The right people are going to be able to access it. So that, I do want to hand off to my colleague DJ from AvePoint. He's got some really cool tools to show you that are going to be rolling out along with this. So thank you, everyone.
Part of our conversation today is going to be, how do we take these pieces and parts, put them in your hands, and give you a way to see things at aggregate, right? Because you're going to be labeling things onesie, twosie as you go about your day. How do you see that stuff in aggregate in one spot and start to develop some understanding around your broader environment? And how do you help them help you make all of this stuff work? So I'm DJ, I'm from AvePoint. My clicker is not working. There we go. All right. Okay. I don't know, am I driving this or? I'm just gonna do the old next slide. All right, so I work with AvePoint. We've been working with state of North Carolina for a while now, I think 3 or 4 years. Here we go. We actually take the device in our hand. All right. So now that I look remotely incompetent or wholly incompetent, so we've been working with you for a number of years, and what we get to do is we get to take all of the plumbing that Microsoft builds and give you surfaces and knobs to help you control that plumbing in some ways, right? So we've been around for a while. This slide to me just says, hey, we're a real company. About me, I spent about 15 years as an IT professional in higher ed and K-12. So I sat in seat doing a lot of this work, and in many ways wish I had an AvePoint back then, so I wasn't scripting and PowerShelling and all that kind of stuff to be able to get things done. And the ability to extend this to users is really where I think we get to have some fun and put some power in your hands. So when we get involved, typically there are a set of challenges that we land on, right? And all 4 of these are really around data security, right? So how do you have stuff all over the place? How do I start tagging it, labeling it to pull it together, put like with like? That overexposed conversation. Security used to be inside, outside, right? Keep the bad guys out, keep everything in, and we're good. Well, you've got 70,000 people in your house, right? So if you've got 70,000 people in your house, inside, outside isn't the only delineation you need to think about, right? You need to think about which of those 70,000 people inside your house need to have this access, right? So that's when we talk about overexposed, right? Data sprawl, is it in OneDrive? Is it in SharePoint, right? Where does it sit? Where does it live? And the answer is everywhere, right? And then data loss, right? If we know where it is or we don't know where it is, then we start running into trouble with keeping track of it, right? And so all of those 4 things are things that you encounter. And what we understand at AvePoint is these 4 things are interconnected, right? If you have one of these issues, you have all of these issues. That's where we come in to help. And so what'll happen as a part of this labeling initiative is you'll get the label showing up in the workspaces. Then you're also going to get access to something we call MyHub. Right? So there's one set of interfaces for the IT people. IT folks, I'll talk to you all at some point later and we'll walk you through it. Cool toys. But for everybody else, when you get into MyHub, what you'll see is you'll see a couple of things, right? This is where all of the things you have access to bubble up in one spot, right? So what spaces, right? What workspaces am I a part of, right? What teams am I on? What SharePoint sites do I have access to? My Hub gives you a way to see all of that as an inventory perspective. Mark your favorites. Here are the things that I often use. Here are the things that that I have access to more sporadically. So you can start to organize your workspaces and know, right? If you're doing projects or interagency, right? You can start finding and identifying that stuff more easily. You can discover spaces that maybe you're in and you didn't know you were in. So that discover piece allows you to find things, and then you can also take these and slice and dice those views in ways that make sense for you, right? So this is a very individualized way to see all the workspaces that you have access to. When we talk about that shared accountability conversation, that's where the labels really start to come to fruition in terms of an action step, right? So AI is a gift and it's got some challenges, right? The biggest challenge is overexposure, right? So if I've got risky stuff in my space, how do I see that? So in this view, what you're seeing is you're seeing several workspaces, right? Groups, teams, and SharePoint sites. These are sites that you own or have responsibility for that have risky stuff in them. Now, your IT team is going to try to put policies in. They're going to try to put things into control for some of this. But at the end of the day, you know your data. They don't. I was one of them. I didn't know, right? So they can come chasing it down and trying to figure it out, or we can give you the mechanism to sort of identify these issues and self-correct. And a lot of times it's just a simple, oops, this didn't have a label on it. Oops, this has the wrong label on it, right? Usually it's little stuff. You see it and you immediately go, that's the fix. IT sees it across 70,000 people, and Ash is starting to look like me, right? And we don't want him to get there, right? So what happens is we see those risky items, and then when we drill down, right now I'm looking at a SharePoint site, I can see how many items in that space are risky, right? I can see some of the basic information, right? Is it shared externally? How big is it in terms of file size? I can start seeing those key risk details, and then I can drill down even further. And now I can see exactly what is the item and why is it flagged, right? Why is this flagged as risky? So in this instance, we've got an item that's overexposed, right? It's shared with a large group of users. And so if you imagine that confidential tag, right? If I've got something flagged as confidential or restricted, but it's shared with a group of 50 or 100 people, right? That may be incongruous, right? That might be an issue. Whereas if it's public and it's shared with the whole tenant, well, it's public, right? And so that's where you can see this and immediately start drilling down and finding out, oh, as I was going through and tagging and flagging, I missed something, something changed. I mean, nothing ever changes in government. So you're good, right? Nothing ever changes, right? When things change, you can have the ability to identify it and go, let me adjust that. Let me fix that, right? Not only can you see things, you can also take action, right? And so one of the things our customers tell us all the time, don't show me a list of problems. I got enough problems, right? Can I do something about these problems? Can I fix it? You can fix it right here. So you can go in and adjust those labels from within the tool. So I don't have to find it here, then go open it in Word and then go change a tag, right? Microsoft is helping you out, putting it right in the workspace. Now, as I'm doing that kind of inspection and review, I can adjust it right there in this workspace. I don't have to jump out to SharePoint or wherever to go make that change, right? Sorry, there's a lag between when I push in. Right. And so across the board, right, when we say these things are interconnected, right, that interconnection, the shared responsibility, the you helping, right, it's the whole thing. You remember the Cosby Show, right? You help me, help you, and you need help, right? Like this is that situation come to life. I'm sorry, is it not cool to say Cosby anymore? My bad. My bad. I was a child of the 80s. I'm sorry. It's, yes. So, but seriously, the shared accountability conversation, when this thing gets rolling, right, once it rolls out and once we start getting that symbiotic relationship back and forth, IT's life gets a lot easier. Your life gets a lot easier. That AI rollout gets a whole lot safer, goes a whole lot faster, right? And everybody's better off, right? So when the time comes, you will see me again, Jennifer, who's my colleague in the back. You'll see her on occasion, Diego. We're around. We're here to help. We're looking forward to working with North Carolina for a while.
Thank you, everyone. So we have 15 minutes if there are questions regarding this. And repeat it.
Yeah, I can repeat the question. I think you mean the public records requests. Yeah. So the question was, how are labels being handled with public records requests? So you should always, your agency should have a policy on public records requests, right? Probably goes through legal. You probably got a person who that's their responsibility. But I actually think labels are going to help us in responding to public records requests because it will help identify data very quickly that is either subject to the Public Records Act or exempt from the Public Records Act, right? So if you find an email that sort of fits the description, but it's labeled restricted, your legal team is going to go in and figure out why it's restricted. Might be because it's exempt from the public records law. So I think it's actually going to help us. But you should have someone on your team who is looking at those requests, and we will likely be working with them to help them with using the tool so that they can comply. That's a great question.
So the question is it going to be like live TV when we are rolling out the labels? So the label is actually going to, and Karen is probably going to laugh at me because I'm going to use the word journey, but we have to start small, and we will be slowly labeling the file. So there will be, of course, a user intervention. So a user is labeling a file, but there will also be tools that we will be providing you that would allow you to bulk label. One of those tools that DJ provided you is AppPoint. So it's usually good to have visibility into what kind of data you have and what labels should apply to it. But it will be rolled out agency by agency because every agency also has a privacy officer. They also have their guidance, and they also have the way that they want to label and how fast they want to go. So that would be the journey. Yeah, so AppPoint, we started providing delegated access to agency admins first, but now we have reached a maturity cycle. So we've been working on this project for about a year, and we were able to give delegated access to agency admins to really see their data. But we want to go the next step, and the next step is to give users the visibility to that data. Because at the end of the day, we are IT. We don't know what data is restricted and where the data resides. Yeah, so the question is, when are agencies going to see labels for their files? When is going to be available for them? So the first thing what we are going to do is roll it out for DIT completely, so we can kind of see it. The main thing about labels is we really don't want to do a business impact because labels are super restrictive. So one of the things that you learned from Michelle was you're labeling every file. So if that file has to travel and it is really required for business purposes for it to travel, then that exception has to be in place. So that is the reason why for this slow rollout, but we'll be working with every agency and then slowly going through that process because we need to understand through AppPoint and other tools, what is the landscape, how much data is, where the data resides, and what type of data is before we start applying these controls. Okay, yes. So I can tell you our DIT rollout is October. And our goal is to get completely everything rolled out by the end of this year. We've been working with Martha and Bernice on this. This is one of those big initiatives that we really want to get done. So it is an aggressive timeline, but as soon as we finish that, then we'll start with the other agencies. But we have been working with other agencies and advertising this since last year. So that is what our goal is. And also training, because training is a very important component of this. So I'll let you read the whole question because I don't want to mess it up.
Okay. Will there be guidelines and timelines around properly classifying our older files? This will be quite a bit of work and take some time to do correctly. Will this be the responsibility of each unit, or will a DIT liaison be involved to help facilitate?
So this is going to be a shared responsibility. And the reason why it's a shared responsibility, because DIT is a capability provider. We can provide you a tool, but at the end of the day, the user owns the data. They know what the data is and how it should be classified. So from a tooling perspective, we will be providing you the different tools, but based on your guidelines, you will be able to do that work. But we will be also be doing some bulk labeling. Martha, if you want to add anything else. Okay. But it's going to be a shared responsibility. Yeah. So the question is that who owns the label and what is the authority, and does the user have the ability to change the label? I'm repeating it so people online can hear. So when you are going to create a new document, our goal is to label it statewide internal, because it is an internal label. But let's say it is public information, it can be shared, then you'll be able to downgrade that label to public, providing a justification on why. So that way there is a record of you reducing that label. If there is data on that file, which is PHI, then you will get a policy tip just like Michelle mentioned to you that, hey, it should be labeled confidential, and it will change it to confidential. But if you really need to, for some reason, you need to make it internal for some business justification, then that business justification would have to be provided. But it will be part of the process. Just the creator of the document, you cannot, because it's not your document. You're receiving that document from someone else because they're the author of that document. So those are the things that we will have to work through in order for, because it is really a OCM heavy implementation where it is a change to the organization. So today we don't label anything. Tomorrow things will be labeled, so things will be protected. So Brent, you're basically saying that if something is labeled, you need a way to relabel something correctly. Is that what the question is? Yep. So, so from a technology perspective, there is bulk labeling and there's bulk override, but it would have to fit the business requirement or the business outcome that you're looking for. When it comes from e-discovery does respect the labels as well. So when you do an e-discovery search from a legal perspective, those labels are searchable from a content perspective. So I'm going to summarize your question and make sure I'm summarizing this properly. So your work involves working with PHI, and that all the data that you're constantly working with is PHI because it's part of the business process. So what you're saying is every time I'm going to look at that file, it's going to say restricted. Yes. Yeah. So the high risk, yeah. So this is a DJ question, but there's criteria which is built in. There are some and or things that make it high risk. So if you have PHI and it's shared externally, that's what's going to flag it at high risk. But I'll let DJ talk a little bit more about this from an AvePoint perspective.
Yeah, just one of those things like you called my name. So relative to your situation, what I really hear you saying, tell me if I'm translating this right, you're different. Right. And so we have the ability to customize what that flagging looks like per agency. Right. So we have the ability. So it's not one size fits all. If I did that, you all would run me out of this room. And so we don't have a one size fits all. We can set up a rule set that maps to your context. So that way those risk factors actually make sense. Otherwise, you ignore them all and then we lose all the value.
Yeah, and So think about it. When it comes to business processes, this is where it becomes very challenging to roll out this type of technology because you understand the business context, we understand the technology. So how do we merge the two together to create a solution? So that's why it's a slow rollout process. But the goal at the end of the day, and this is, we try to advertise this, the goal at the end of the day is to protect state data. This is just a capability that would allow us to get there. Would we get there tomorrow? Probably not, because it is it's 65,000 users in our tenant, which is a large amount of users, and also 33 agencies, with 33 agencies having different requirements. So as it is a partnership, so that's why I'm saying it's a shared responsibility for us to protect the data. But as guidance, I always tell people, refer to your acceptable use policy, because one of the things that Vijay mentioned this morning, which was super critical, people, process, technology. Technology is not the only thing that can protect data. It is the people and it's also the process. So there might be a technology gap, but you're covering that gap using people and process. Yes. Yeah. So the question is, we have a bunch of old files, and I'm assuming these are sitting on some servers and not even sitting on SharePoint and OneDrive. So this is a technology gap, I would say, that not all files. So when we are talking about Purview and these tools, we are talking about the Microsoft 365 ecosystems. So if you have files which are sitting outside of these ecosystems, AvePoint is not going to provide you visibility into it. Purview does have the capability, and we are looking. Can I mention? Okay. Okay. So we are looking at a different tool called Varonis, and that allows us to even go into those file servers and label, but it's a different technology. But yes, that is one of the gaps that we have to fulfill, and because those are outside of the ecosystem. But we will be utilizing that tool in order to label those files. Hey, Patrick.
Well, fun fact, it actually is in the data classification policy that you are supposed to be labeling your data. So it is on page 6, if anybody is wondering. I was actually wondering if somebody was going to ask me this question, but it is in policy now. It is best practices, and we've been working for over a year now to start moving forward with labeling. So great question. Go read your data classification policy, guys. It's riveting. Anybody else have any other questions?
So the good part is you can use Copilot, or you can also use, if you want to summarize, because it's a public information, so you can just go to Copilot chat and say, give me the NCDIT statewide classification policy and give me all the details regarding, and it will tell you. And to be honest with you, this is, we have a lot of policies, but I would also refer you that this is a statewide policy. Every agency also might have their own acceptable use policy. So Patrick, my friend from DOT, you might have a different policy that provides further restrictions. So what is the restrictive of them both? Same thing for DHHS, they might have a policy which is a little bit more restrictive. Are you specifically asking me for a timeline for handling all files? Is that okay? So that is a question I would not be able to answer. So I'm going to use my favorite word called journey, and say that the first step, it is like climbing some stairs, right? The first step is we are trying to first put the baseline technology in place. And the biggest part is training the user. So the people who who know the data and kind of understand how to protect it. Because if you know today you protect the data, you know that you should not be sending confidential information or PHI out, right? Does not matter where that file is sitting. So it will be a combination of people and process. And when the technology gets there, we will be able to complete the task. I personally do not know, sir, how long that timeline would be. So I'll give you an analogy, right? And the analogy is, let's say you have some jewelry that you put in a safe deposit box and you lock it. That's your key to get inside of the safe delivery box, right? But let's say you had a mechanism from a technology perspective that allowed you to put a RFID around that gold chain. Now that gold chain has a tag, so it does not matter where it goes, you know exactly where it is, and you can restrict permissions on that tag. That's what we are talking about, sir. So think about you're locking a cabinet today. What we are talking about, you're locking a document, and you're providing who has access to this. So if this is labeled internal and you stick it on a USB drive and you give it to somebody, guess what? They cannot open up that document. It is restricted. So what we are used to today, which is something from a technology term is called role-based access. What we are talking about are labels. They work in conjunction with each other. So you can give somebody access to a SharePoint site, but if they don't have access to that label, they will not be able to open up that document. Hopefully that helps. Yeah, so the question online is there a default label? So the default label that we are going to do is called a statewide internal document, statewide internal. So anybody within those whitelisted domains will have access to that file. And that is going to be internal. So think of it, so the question is that I label something, I'm the author of that document, and I retire. And if I retire, what happens to those documents that I have labeled? So the question is, number one, if other people also have access to that label, there's no need for them to change that label because they have access. Now, if there is a need for labeling everything from internal to confidential because it was mislabeled properly, then that would be a tool that would be provided to enable you. So think of it today. A good way to give you an example today, you have a file cabinet that might have two keys in it. I have a key and you have a key, and we both can open up the cabinet. So think of the same way as a label. I have access to that label and you have access to that label too. So we both can access that file. Now, for some reason that label needs to change, then there will be a process for you to change that label. Yes, because internal, so think of it, anything which is labeled statewide internal, that means I can share with Karen, I can share with Martha, because we all work for the state. But if I decide to share that document with DJ because I don't want to pick your app point for the next 3 years, he won't be able to see it. Sorry, but that was a joke. That was a tough example. But the goal is that internal document means it's only for state employees. I cannot share that document externally. There will be different labels. So Martha mentioned 4 labels. One is public. The second one is internal. The third one is confidential, and the last one is restricted. But the goal is, this is just the beginning. And I'm hoping this journey continues. We'll be having more training sessions, more thing about sensitive labels, but this was just the introduction on how we are going to protect the state data.